Welcome to Session 2B of the One Faith of Original Christianity, Pisteuo in the Gospels, Part 1. We've covered pistis in the Gospels and developed the three meanings that we've seen. There definitely are three different patterns of contextual inference with the three different sets of signpost words. But before we launch into the book of Acts and the epistles, I want to discuss my plan of how we're going to discover the meaning of the one faith that's referred to in Ephesians 4. I think that the best way to organize the research and teaching is to cover the other meanings first by going through all their clear occurrences, and all we'll have left will be the one faith occurrences plus any leftover difficult verses. But by then we should have learned a whole lot and have enough understanding that we can tackle the more difficult verses as well. I also have seen how profitable it has been to cover the basics of believing again. To build upon that tonight, I'm going to switch to covering the verb pisteuo in the Synoptic Gospels, because this will nail down what we've learned with pistis. Then after adding that to the foundation we're building, we're going to return to pistis in the Gospel of John, then pistis in the Old Testament, and then pistis in Acts and beyond. And when we're done, we won't just intimately know the one faith of original Christianity, we'll know all the kinds of pistis. Oh, glory, hallelujah. This subject of believing, was actually one of the signature teachings of Jesus' ministry. He was always talking about it. Why? Because one day soon, salvation would be dependent upon believing. Remember Romans 3? The faith of Jesus Christ comes by believing. Plus, the apostles needed to be trained in deliverance ministry work. God confirms the word of apostles by miracles following. Well, somebody has to believe for that. Who? The apostles had to do that. Those who minister to God's people need to learn the mechanics of believing, both kinds. Jesus was a believing machine. He knew how to do that inside and out and taught it. In going through these occurrences, he is teaching us. That is what is so thrilling about this subject. Do you want to become a believing machine? Get revelation, believe it, work a miracle. Get revelation, believe it, work healing. Well, boom shakalaka, train your minds to believe. That's what we're going to do. So now I'll go to the first occurrence of pisteuo in Matthew. Matthew chapter 8, verse 5. And when Jesus was entered into Capernaum, there came unto him a centurion. We covered this with pistis, but we're going to go back over it. Beseeching him, and saying, Lord, my servant lies at home sick of the palsy, grievously tormented. And Jesus said unto him, I'll come and heal him. The centurion answered and said, Lord, I'm not worthy that you should come under my roof, but speak the word only, and my servant shall be healed. For I am a man under authority, having soldiers unto me. And I say to this man, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes. And my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard it, he marveled and said to them that followed, Verily I say to you, I've not found so great pistis, no, not in Israel. And I say unto you that many shall come from the east and west, and shall sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. That would be pretty cool, don't you think? But the children of the kingdom shall be cast out into outer darkness, and there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Verse 13, and Jesus said to the centurion, go your way, as you have believed, Pisteuo, so be it done unto thee. And his servant was healed in the self-same hour. So this passage has a mutual first use of pistis and pisteuo. All right? So the patterns are going to be similar. We find that to be true with words that are of the same root. The noun, the verb, the adjective, the adverb, the prefixed words. They often will have almost all the same traits in our grid. So this is a single instance for it was a specific need. The centurion thought things through logically, concluded that Jesus was able to heal. He spoke accordingly. Both by asking for help, he was beseeching, and speaking confidently to Jesus. Then there was a connection between his mental state of believing and his receiving. As you have believed, so be it done. So this is this is the pattern I think we're going to build. The second occurrence of Pisteuo has a similar set of elements. Look at Matthew 9:27. Matthew 9:27. We covered this one too with pistis. And when Jesus departed, 2 blind men followed him, crying, saying, Thou son of David, have mercy on us. And when he was coming to the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus said to them, Believe, Pisteuo, ye that I am able to do this? And they said, Yes, Lord. Then he touched their eyes, saying, According to your pistis be it unto you. So here's the second occurrence. It has many of the same traits. The 2 blind men affirmed their belief with words. Jesus acted upon his believing. He touched them. Their reception was connected with their belief. According to your pistis, be it unto you. So from the first 2 occurrences, it looks to be a similar pattern for both the noun and the verb. All right? Many words that are related to each other will have the same signposts. All right? Well, that makes sense because they have related meanings. Before we do our grid, let's look at the third one. All right? Matthew 18:2. Jesus called a little child unto him and set him in the midst of them and said, Verily I say unto you, except you be converted and become as little children, you shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever therefore shall humble himself as this little child, the same is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoso shall receive one such little child in my name receives me. But whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Well, now this third occurrence is different than the first 2. It's not involving a dire situation or healing or specific need. This is believing for salvation. The word converted, turn, is a salvation word. Also, it mentions entering into the kingdom of heaven in this context. And Jesus is the object of the believing. So what we have here is a different set of contextual inference. The first 2 occurrences of Pisteuo were for specific incidents. So we can set up a grid for the Pisteuo as the first meeting. It's an individual situation. That's the column heading for this first meeting of Pisteuo. Then the second trait is that pistis shows up in the same context. So we'll put column heading pistis. And so for Matthew 8:13 and Matthew 9:28, we'll put an X in pistis. Then both of them were confirmed with speech. We'll put an X and have a speech column. That's the third one, and put an X for Matthew 8:13 and Matthew 9:28. We're filling out the new grid on this. So your column heading for this one is speech. That's the third column. The fourth column is action. And in Matthew 9:28, there was action. Okay. He touched their eyes. Then the next column is mental. In Matthew 8:13, the centurion thought things through. He had logic for it. And then the next column in the grid is asked. The centurion besought, and the blind men cried. And then finally, the last column is I have receive. There is a direct correlation between believing and receiving that is explained. All right? So that's the first sets of meanings, the first grid for Pisteuo. But this third occurrence in Matthew 18:2 does not fit that pattern. So we're going to hold this in abeyance until we see some more of these before we cite the different traits and put the column headings in. But the one thing that is interesting here is that believe in me in Matthew 18:6, the little ones who believe in me. It's not the word in. It's not en in Greek. It's the word eis, E-I-S, which is unto. That's interesting. We're going to keep our antenna up on this one and see if this shows up as a trait with the other occurrences of this second meeting if we run into any more. So now we're going to go on to the fourth occurrence of Pisteuo in Matthew, and we're back to the fig tree. Matthew 21:21 is the next place. Jesus answered and said to them, verily I say unto you, if you have pistis, and doubt not, you shall not only do this which is done to the fig tree, but also if you shall say to this mountain, be thou removed and be thou cast into the sea, it shall be done. And all things whatsoever you shall ask in prayer, believing, you shall receive. So, this fourth occurrence is fitting with the first and the second. It involved the fig tree with a specific incident. So for Matthew 21:22 in our grid, we put in an X in the individual column. All right? Then an occurrence of pistis shows up in the same context. So if you have pistis in verse 21 and doubt not, so we put an X in the pistis column in the third row here in our new grid for Matthew 21:22. Then there is no action taken that's mentioned, so we leave that one blank, the fourth column, the action column. Then the fifth column is mental. And here it says if you don't doubt. Well, that's mental. Then in the asked column, verse 21:22 says, whatever you ask in prayer. So you can put prayer there in the third row under asked in that column. And then finally, in the receive column, it says, in all things whatsoever you shall ask in prayer, believing, you shall receive. So again, there is a direct correlation between believing and receiving that is demonstrated. So this is the traits, the set of traits that's common, the signpost words, for this meaning of Pisteuo. Isn't that interesting? See, now in this grid, there's no before column, because people have always had the mental capability of believing. So the first column is individual. That's why I left out before, because we're going to see there's other occurrences of this. So that's not really a factor. Now, let's go on to the next occurrence of Pisteuo. Matthew 21:25. Matthew 21:25. You just have to go through this and use the grid. You'll get used to it after a few times, and then it should be pretty easy for you. Matthew 21:25. The baptism of John, whence was it? From heaven or of men? And they reasoned with themselves, saying, If we shall say, from heaven, he will say unto us, well, then why didn't you believe him? Pisteuo. If we shall say of men, we fear the people, for all hold John as the prophet. So, this occurrence in Matthew 21:25 fits with the second meaning of Pisteuo. Okay? Because this involves, why didn't you believe John the Baptist? Well, what was the John the Baptist teaching about? He was teaching about the kingdom of heaven. So salvation was involved. The baptism of John, whence was it? Well, they had to get baptized to be saved in that administration, right? So this is a salvation context. So that's what fits with the second meaning. All right? If we look at the grid, another grid for the second meaning, the column will have, instead of individual, I have a continued column. Then, instead of pistis, I have salvation that shows up in the context. Then, the third column is the object of the believing. In this case, either Jesus or John talking about Jesus. All right? So, those are the traits that I see so far. We'll be finding some other ones. So, in Matthew 18:6, I put an X in the continued column, an X in the salvation column, and an X in the object of the believing Jesus column. Then for Matthew 21:25, I have an X in the continued column, an X under salvation, and then in the Jesus column, I have John written in parentheses, because why didn't you believe him? Believe John, the Baptist, but he was preaching about Jesus. Okay? The next one is just a few more verses later. In Matthew 21:28, Jesus is teaching the Pharisees. He says, But what think ye? A certain man had 2 sons, and he came to the first and said, Son, go to work today in my vineyard. Verse 29, and he answered and said, I won't go. But afterwards he repented and he went. Verse 30, and he came to the second son and said likewise. And he answered and said, I'll go. But he didn't go. Verse 31, Jesus asked the Pharisees, which of those 2 did the will of the Father? And they said to him, the first. And Jesus said to them, verily I say to you, that the publicans and the harlots will go into the kingdom of God before you. For John came unto you in the way of righteousness, and you believed him not, Pisteuo, not. But the publicans and the harlots believed, Pisteuo, him. And ye, when you had seen it, repented not afterwards, that you might believe him. So here, believe it occurs 3 times. Okay? This section, Matthew 21, 28 and following, fits with the second usage, because it implies a continuing trust. The context involves salvation, because it speaks of repenting and the kingdom. All right? Now, here is where there's a set of traits that are common to this second meaning, because there is going to be a set of prepositions following. Believe in Jesus, or believe upon Jesus. There's actually 4 different prepositions that can occur after Pisteuo in this salvation context in meaning number 2. So, I had a continued column, a salvation column, and a Jesus column. So the 4th column is going to be eis, E-I-S. We're going to list every one of the occurrences where believing unto occurs, because then we'll be able to separate out the common traits for that and see exactly what it means. Then there are some occurrences where they believe someone with Pisteuo, but the someone that they believe is just plain dative case. It's not believe in them or believe unto them. All right? Just plain dative case. And that is what is present here in Matthew. All 3 of these. Believe, verse 21, verse 32. John came unto you in the way of righteousness, and you believed, Pisteuo, him not. Him is plain dative case. It's not believe in him or believe unto him. All right? But then it goes on to say, the publicans and the harlots believed him. Again, the word him is dative case. It's not believed in him or believed unto him. And then it goes on to the 3rd occurrence, when you'd seen it, repented not afterwards, that you might believe him. The word him at the end of the verse is also just plain old dative case, not epi or en or eis. So, I have a column for eis, a column for dative, a column for en, and a column for epi, because we're going to see there's a bunch of these. And after we're done, we'll be able to discern a pattern. So this is the second grid for the second meaning of Pisteuo, and this is believing unto salvation, basically. And the things that they believe are going to depend upon what administration they're in. So the final column is going to be administration. We're going to see that in a moment. So in Matthew 18:6, it was believing in the 4th administration. In Matthew 21:25, with John the Baptist, it was believing in the 4th administration. And in Matthew 21:32, it was believing according to the tenets of the 4th administration. All right? So now we go on to the next one, Matthew 24:22. See, we're looking at the occurrences of Pisteuo in the Synoptic Gospels. The next one's Matthew 24:22. And except those days should be shortened, and there should no flesh be saved, But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Then if any man shall say unto you, Lo, here is the Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall rise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great sights and wonders, insomuch that, if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. Behold, I have told you before. Wherefore, if they shall say unto you, Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth, or behold, he's in the secret chambers, believe it not. So, these two occurrences of Pisteuo fit with the second pattern, except instead of believing in Jesus or believing John the Baptist talking about Jesus, this is believing in false messiahs. All right? And also there's another detail regarding which gospel they will believe. You see, in the One Hope of Original Christianity class, we saw there was a gospel to the sixth administration. It was different than the gospel that we believe in the fifth administration to be saved. The elements of that were the new song. All right? So then I showed in that One Hope class that there was a gospel to each administration. And that good news was regarding how to be saved, how to have life, how to get to paradise or heaven, whichever. All right? The people from the law administration could get to paradise by some means, right? Well, that was their good news, their gospel, the good news to them. Then the same is true in the Christ administration. To get into the kingdom, there was good news. There was a gospel to obey. Then there's a gospel for us in this fifth administration. So that's where I put the administration column, the last one in this second grid. And for Matthew 24, verse 23 and verse 26, I have the sixth administration is the administration which this gospel pertains in that instance. All right, you see the things that are in common? What administration is the gospel pertaining to that they need to believe? All right, so now we go on to the next one, which is Matthew 27, verse 39. Matthew 27, verse 39. And they passed by, reviling him, wagging their heads, and saying, Thou that destroyest the temple and builds it up in 3 days, save yourself. If you be the Son of God, come down from the cross. Likewise also the chief priests, mocking him with the scribes and elders, said, He saved others, but himself he can't save. If he be the King of Israel, let him come down now from the cross, and we will Pisteuo him. He trusted in God. Let him deliver him now, if he will have him. For he said, I am the Son of God. So, this use of Pisteuo fits with the second pattern. It's supposedly regarding salvation, and in this case it would be according to the fourth administration. But here's an interesting detail. The critical texts add the word epi in verse 42. They said, we will believe epi, upon him. So, in our grid, we put Matthew 27, 42. This is continued believing. It is for salvation. The one believed is Jesus. And then we put an X in the epi column. We leave ace and dative and n unchecked, but we put an X in the epi column because that's upon shows up there. And then in the administration column, this is regarding the fourth administration. You see how to do this? Now, this epi, according to Bollinger, means it connotes repose or reliance. We're going to get into that in another session. The next one is in Mark chapter 1. Mark chapter 1. Verse 14. Now after that John was put in prison, Jesus came into Galilee preaching the gospel of the kingdom of God and saying, the time is fulfilled and the kingdom of God is at hand. Repent ye and believe the gospel. Well, here the word "and" appears in the Greek text. King James guys didn't translate it. Believe in the gospel. So this first occurrence of Pisteuo in the book of Mark fits the second pattern. So in our grid for Mark 1:15, in the first column it's continued, put an X there. In the second column it's regarding salvation, put an X there. In the object of what's believed column, usually Jesus or John the Baptist, in there we believe the gospel. The word gospel goes in that X. In the ace column we leave that empty. The dative case column we leave that empty. But in the N column we put an X. The epi column is empty. And then what administration is this concerning? Well, this is the fourth administration regarding the kingdom. All right? So that's how this one fits. Next one is Mark 5:22. And behold, there comes one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet and besought him greatly, saying, my little daughter lies at the point of death. I pray thee, come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live. And Jesus went with them, and much people followed him and thronged him. Now this is the incident that while he's on the way, the woman with the issue of blood touches the hem of his garment. So we're going to skip to verse 35. While he yet spake, there came from the ruler of the synagogue certain which said, thy daughter is dead. Why do you trouble the master any more? And as soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, be not afraid, only believe, Pisteuo. And he allowed no man to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And he came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue and saw the tumult and them that wept and wailed greatly. And when he was come in, he said to them, why do you make this ado? Why do you weep? The damsel is not dead, but sleeps. And they laughed him to scorn. But when he put them all out, he took the father and the mother of the damsel, and them that were with him, and entered in where the damsel was lying. And he took the damsel by the hand, and said to her, Talitha cumi, which is Aramaic, being interpreted, damsel, I say to you, arise. And straightway the damsel arose and walked, for she was of the age of 12 years, and they were astonished with great astonishment. So this one in Mark 5 definitely is fitting with the first pattern of Pisteuo, not the second. All right? It was regarding a specific need. The ruler of the synagogue asked. He beseeched him greatly. Jesus took action. He traveled to the home, and then he put out the unbelievers. He took the girl by the hand. He also spoke words affirming his believing, both to the father and to the crowd and to the girl. Finally, there were mental issues involved, fear not. And Jesus was persistent, even when ridiculed and scorned, even when they said, she's dead, you don't need to come anymore. Okay? So we can fill out the grid on this one for Mark chapter 5. All right? And in this case, we put an X in the individual. In the pistis column, there's no occurrence of pistis in this context. In the speech column, we put an X. In the action column, action was taken. In the mental column, I have persist in parenthesis. In the ask column, I have beseech. All right? But now this incident, though, is really interesting. There's a whole lot of principles that are mentioned here. All right? Who believed? Well, Jesus, of course, did. He worked the miracle, which involved the manifestation of pistis to raise the little girl from the dead. But two other things were involved. The girl was dead, so she could not believe for herself. So Jesus took the parents with him in the room. He kicked everybody else out. He tested the waters by saying, why are you guys carrying on? She's only asleep. And everyone laughed him to scorn. So he knew that everyone in that room was not believing. And so he kicked them all out. All right? But he did take the father and mother with him because, number one, the little girl could not believe for herself because she was dead. But number two, parents are responsible to believe for their children until they're mature enough so they can believe on their own. See? You see all the details here? He found out everyone else was not believing, so he put them out of the room. And then he took the parents with him because they're responsible to believe for the little girl. Wow. So, the next use of Pisteuo also fits this first pattern. This is an incident which was covered in Matthew. However, Mark deals with it in such great detail that I need to cover it to bring out the principles of believing. Mark chapter 9, verse 14. Mark chapter 9, verse 14. And when he came to his disciples, he saw a great multitude about them, and the scribes questioning with them. And straightway all the people, when they beheld him, were greatly amazed, and running to him, saluted him. Wow, that's remarkable, isn't it? This crowd was really agitated. They were amazed. They ran. Okay, so you have a crowd that's really up, really dynamic. Okay? Sometimes you have crowds that are all lethargic. Sometimes you have crowds that are sleepy. Sometimes you have crowds that are disinterested. Sometimes you have crowds that are angry. Woo! Okay. Well, God knows what to do with those things, and he'll tell you. So, and he asked the scribes, what are you questioning with my apostles about? Okay. Well, this crowd is agitated. Plus there's opposers there. Wow. That's a potentially dangerous situation. So Jesus needed to be aware of the temperament of the crowd and manage it if he needed to. All right? Verse 17, and one of the multitude answered and said, Master, I brought unto you my son, who has a dumb spirit. And wheresoever he takes him, he tears him, he foams, he gnashes with his teeth, he pineth away. All right, he's skinny. And I spake unto thy disciples that they should cast him out, and they could not. Gee, there's enough information there you probably could diagnose what kind of malady this child had. But there's more to it than just physical in this case. Not every situation that someone has these symptoms is a spirit involved. In this case, there was. In other situations, they have all the symptoms, but a spirit is not involved. All right? So anyway, the disciples could not cast it out. So verse 19, Jesus answered him and said, "Oh, faithless apostas generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring him unto me." And they brought him unto him, and when he saw him, straightway the spirit tore him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed foaming. Wow, that was pretty stark. The adversary immediately upped the ante, causing the child to have a seizure right then. Now, there are situations that when we're believing for things that we just need to focus on the goal, despite the gravity or grossness of the situation or the antics of the adversary. Who's in charge? Greater is he that's in you than he that's in the world, right? Don't get shook. Mark 9:21. And he asked his father, "How long is it ago since this came unto him?" And he said, "Of a child." Well, since this involved a child, Jesus had to involve the parents, because they are responsible for believing for their children. Well, you can imagine how that was. Pretty emotional. When our children are involved, it really gets to us parents. And apparently, it had gone on for a long time. So this child's father probably was pretty worn down by the situation. Mark 9:22. And it goes on. Oft times that he explains, it cast him into the fire and into the waters to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Well, right then, Jesus knew what was up, because the child's father just communicated his level of believing with that, if you can do anything, have compassion on us. Well, he wasn't really believing yet. That was communicated by the if. But also, he was blaming God for the situation, because he implied that Jesus was not having compassion. If you can do anything, have compassion. So that child was not going to be delivered with that kind of stuff going on. Jesus had to address that for sure. So verse 23, Jesus said to him, if, put it right back in his court, if you can believe, all things are possible to him that believes. And straightway the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe. Help thou my unbelief. Apostia. See, Jesus bounced the ball right back to the Father. If you can believe. But then he also included a great promise. All things are possible to him who believes. Well, that father latched on that. Jesus opened the door and that man jumped. He cried out for help, and he called out Jesus. He called Jesus Lord. That was meaningful. He also declared that he was believing as much as he could. Help thou my unbelief. Well, that's exactly what ministering does. The believing of the ministerer and the ministeree are joined. There are so many principles involved here in this incident. At this point, the crowd control issue also enters in. Jesus saw the crowd was coming together, and soon the situation might get out of hand. So he had to act right then to head off anything that possibly could happen. So, verse 25, when Jesus saw the people came running together, he rebuked the foul spirit, saying unto him, Thou dumb and deaf spirit, I charge you, come out of him, and enter no more in him. So Jesus commanded the miracle with his speech, but the adversary wasn't done yet. He had one more card to play. Verse 26, and the spirit cried and rent him sore, and came out of him, and he was as one dead, insomuch that many said, he's dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. The crowd thought he was dead. You see the situation that Jesus had to deal with here? Not only the child's dilemma, but the father's level of believing, and on top of that, an agitated, excited crowd. But Jesus was undaunted. He knew his Father could tell him how to handle everything, even the crowd. Jesus had dealt with crowds before. They didn't intimidate him. Because remember one time at Nazareth, a crowd of his hometown neighbors was angry with Jesus because he spoke truth to them that offended them. And they were going to throw him off a hilltop, but he just walked through them. That took guidance and perfect timing. But he did it. Another time, the crowd wanted to do the opposite and make him king after the loaves and the fish. But that wasn't time for that. So Jesus got revelation on what to do for that situation. He ordered the apostles to quickly get the boats together. So the crowd thought that they were going to leave by boat. And so that draft Jesus movement was thwarted. But Jesus didn't get in a boat. He was able to sneak off to the mountaintop to be by himself and pray. That's what he needed. But that's not all there was for Jesus to deal with. The child issue was definitely spiritual. He had to contend with an evil intelligence behind the situation. The whipping up of the crowd, the timing of the child's seizure, the falling down unconscious. All those things were orchestrated by spirits causing the child's maladies. But Jesus wasn't shaken. He knew he would triumph. He believed. The same is true for us in similar situations. No matter how the adversary tries to derail us, he has met his match. Because we and God can beat him every time in the name of Jesus Christ. But the apostles, they had tried and failed. Well, they were still in training. They asked Jesus about it later. Verse 28, and when he was come into the house, his disciples asked him privately, why could we not cast him out? And he said to them, this kind can come forth by nothing but by prayer and fasting. Now, there is some debate as to whether the words and fasting are in the text. Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus from the 4th century omit that word fasting. This entire verse is omitted in the corresponding record in Matthew 27 by those same two manuscripts. But the word fasting is included in papyrus number 45, which is from the 3rd century. But unfortunately, that part of the text is somewhat damaged, so it cannot be completely verified. It does show up also in Codex Alexandrinus, which is 5th century. So there's big guns on either side of this one. So how do we choose which reading is the right one? Greek text scholars tend to prefer elements of external evidence, especially the date of the manuscript. And so they say the earlier the better. However, we have 4th and 5th and 3rd century manuscripts on either side of this. So how do you choose which one? The word has to fit. That's how you choose. Because there's also internal evidence. And internal evidence, I think, should be preferred over external evidence. Because the word has to fit. We use inductive logic, not deductive logic, right? If we go that route, the text scholar Alford, the A in Berry's interlinear, argues for more weight to be given to internal evidence. So whenever there is internal evidence, Alford tries to choose that instead of the external evidence. So which one's right here? Well, first we have to make sure we understand the phrase prayer and fasting. You know, many believers think that the term fasting means to go without food. Well, is there any reference in this passage in Mark that they went without food? No. However, Isaiah 58, I think, gives us a better understanding about fasting. Look at Isaiah 58. Isaiah 58, verse 1. Cry aloud, spare not. Lift up your voice like a trumpet, and show my people their transgression, and the house of Jacob their sins. Yet they seek me daily, and delight to know my ways, as a nation that did righteousness, and forsook not the ordinance of their God. They ask of me the ordinances of justice, and they take delight in approaching to God. And they say, why have we fasted, God, and you are not seeing it? Wherefore have we afflicted our soul? Oh, wah. And thou takest no knowledge. God says, behold, in the day of your fast you find pleasure, and exact all your labors. He says, verse 4, behold, you fast for strife and debate, and to smite with the fist of wickedness. You shall not fast, as you do this day, in an effort to try to make your voice to be heard on high. Huh. You know, there are genuine fasts in the Bible, but then there are also purely religious ones. In another teaching, I tracked the word fasting through the Bible and saw that it originated in response to calls to fast and pray because the believers were in a dire situation back then. And when we put ourselves back into ancient times and think about it, I think we can learn more that will help us. Because food preparation back then was a very involved thing. You know, they didn't have fast food restaurants. And when they sat down to eat, it was formal. So originally, what was behind that fasting was to forego all that effort and concentrate on prayer because they were in a dire situation. Well, the first time they did that in the Bible, they were delivered. So, the nature of human beings is, well, if it worked once, it might work again. So more and more fasts were proclaimed until it had become a ritual and had taken on a life of its own. By the time of Isaiah, when the prophet received revelation for chapter 58, it had gone too far and needed a reset. They were fasting for strife and debate. I can go longer without food than you can. I'm holier than you are. That's baloney. The point of fasting is not so much to go without food. It's more about being so busy serving and helping that you don't have the time to prepare food, etc. Chapter 58, verse 5. Is it such a fast that I have chosen? A day for a man to afflict his soul? Is it to bow down his head as a bulrush and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Are you going to call that a fast and an acceptable day to the Lord? Okay, is this not the fast that I have chosen? To loose the bands of wickedness and to undo heavy burdens and to let the oppressed go free and that you break every yoke? Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, that you bring the poor that are cast out to your house? When you see the naked, that you cover him, and that you hide not yourself from your own flesh? That's the fast. That's what genuine fasting is. You're so busy doing those good things, you don't have time for food prep and to eat. That's what it really is. So, what was Jesus getting at in Mark 9? The disciples couldn't cast out a spirit. And Jesus replied, this kind can come forth by nothing but prayer and fasting. Now, I think the word fasting should be there. Else, it doesn't make much sense. Because I bet the apostles were praying up a blue streak, but that wasn't enough. So, are there some situations that this is needed? Sure, because they're so involved and complicated. You just can't go in there and wave your hand over it and it'll go away. We all have encountered situations like that when you try to help people. Because, if it were that easy, they would have figured it out already and not needed our help. But how can we put ourselves in the best position to get the answers we need? Jesus said prayer and fasting, believing and action is how we would say it today. The prayer implies a spiritual perspective, and the fasting implies a practical service viewpoint. In other words, if we reach an impasse in a situation and have exhausted our human efforts and logic, the answers will come, either by believing action based upon prayer via a spiritual communication method, or fasting. All right? Which, according to Isaiah 58, is just getting busy, helping any way we can. So, and as we get involved and serve and act, the answers may come that way. Of course, we just have to put on our hip boots and wade in and be with and work with the people we're trying to help. You have to get your hands dirty. You have to get involved. Well, Jesus did that in this record by asking the father of the child questions. The apostles just wanted to wave their hand over the kid and kick the spirit out. But there were other extenuating circumstances which were not revealed until Jesus got involved with the Father. You see all the principles here? The apostles were still in training. Many of us are in the same state. We're still in training. We've not yet mastered all the techniques of receiving revelation when we need it. Because, one must be able to get quiet and mentally and be able to hear God's still small voice, right? Remember Elijah? In 1 Kings 19:11, God tells Elijah to come out of that cave. What are you doing in that hole there? And he said, go forth, stand upon the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great strong wind rent the mountains and brake in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. Sometimes when we need answers, we'd like them to be as obvious as the wind or the earthquake. But after the earthquake came a fire, and the Lord was not in the fire either. And after the fire, a still small voice. Sometimes when we need answers, we'd like them to be like fire. But the wind, earthquake, or fire method would be too overwhelming. Our free will is involved in our relationship with God, and those things would overpower all that. So when God speaks, it's a still, small voice. We can cut it out. We can cut it off. If we're not attentive, if we're too tired, if we're not focused, and we'll miss it. So we all could get better at receiving revelation. Sometimes we do miss it. Our minds may be too agitated to tune in to God's frequency. Well, we're still in training. So what is the alternative method to get answers if we're not getting them via revelation? Jesus was telling the apostles that sometimes when we're believing, we need to really get in the believing category. We need to get involved. We need to get busy with the people we're trying to help. And then as we're working with them in the details of the situation, we'll notice stuff, and then the answers will come. Well, we're still in training, but there are some deliverance ministers who are really adept and successful in these situations. And one of the traits that I've observed in them is that once they decide to get involved, they won't quit until they're victorious. They're not casually involved. It's not love at a distance. Okay? So those are all the principles right there in that section. Isn't that beautiful? The next occurrence of Pisteuo, Mark 9:42, is the same as Matthew 18:6. So we'll move on to the next one in Mark 11:23 and 24. We covered this with pistis, but I believe there's a few more details to bring out. So look at Mark 11:23, please. Mark 11:23. We just have a few more things to cover, and then we'll be done with this session. Mark 11:23. For verily I say unto you, that whosoever shall say unto this mountain, Be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that those things which he saith shall come to pass, he shall have whatsoever he saith. Therefore I say to you, what things soever you desire when you pray, believe that you already have received them, and you shall have them. So, verse 23, it reveals that doubt is an issue of the heart. Sometimes we're believing for something and we screw up and have momentary doubts. Well, that's human. Often at that point, we're tempted to think that all's lost. Well, we're not believing. Ain't going to work now. No, that was merely a hesitation. It does not count. Of course, it wasn't something that got down into the heart. So we just have to get back up and keep pursuing the mechanics of believing. See, Jesus was a believing machine. Well, we can master the techniques of believing. One technique is positive speech. The word say or saith is repeated in verse 23. I explain that by teaching your speaker is attached to your believer. Speaking expectantly builds believing. They're attached. So, speaking positive will build believing, and speaking positive will reinforce the believing that you already have. It works both ways. Speaking expectantly builds believing. Just ask any athlete before the game. They won't allow themselves to speak negatives, right? If their coach catches them, they'll have to run laps. Well, if athletes can master believing, we sure can. See, the next occurrence of Pisteuo in Mark 11:31 is the duplicate of Matthew 21:25. It's continued. It's not an individual event. It's regarding salvation that John preached according to the fourth administration gospel. And in this case, the object of the verb pisteuo is in the dative case. So we would put an X in dative in that column in the grid for that one. All right. Mark 13:21 is a duplicate of Matthew 24:23. I'll have this in the grid that I supply in the supplemental file. Mark 15:32 is a duplicate of Matthew 27:42. So the next four occurrences of Pisteuo are in a contested section, that longer version of the book of Mark. So I'm going to pass by those and finish out Luke here in the remaining minutes. So let's move to Luke chapter 1, verse 19. There's just a few of these left. Luke chapter 1, verse 19. And the angel answered and said to him, I am Gabriel. You know who you're talking to, he said? That stand in the presence of God. And I'm sent to speak to you and to show you these glad tidings. Zechariah was doubting him. And behold, thou shalt be dumb and not able to speak till the day that these things shall be performed, because you didn't believe my words, which shall be fulfilled in their season. He didn't believe. Luke 1:41 is a related one. It came to pass when Elizabeth heard the salutation of Mary, the babe leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit, and spoke out with a loud voice, and said, Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. And whence is this to me, that the mother of my Lord shall come to me? For lo, as soon as the voice of thy salutation sounded in mine ears, the babe leaped in my womb for joy. And blessed is she that believed, for there shall be a performance of those things which were told her from the Lord. Wow, this is prophecy, and it reinforced Mary's believing, right? She already had believed to conceive the Christ child, so she walks in and hears this. That's encouraging. That's reinforcing. So in Luke 1, in verse 20 and in verse 45, this is an individual situation. It was reinforced with speech. Action was taken. With Zechariah, he had to take action on the believing later on, or else John the Baptist wouldn't have come. All right? There was mental stuff involved. Zechariah doubted. Mary asked for more information. And then in the received column, the prophecy said, Blessed is she that believed, because you're going to receive it. The prophecy shall be fulfilled. So the Luke chapter 1 instances fit with pattern number 1. The next occurrence is the famous parable of the sower in Luke 8. This fits the second grid, the second pattern. Luke 8:11, now the parable is this. The seed is the word of God. Those by the wayside are they that hear. Then comes the devil and takes away the word out of their hearts, lest they should believe and be saved. See, the pattern is, for the second one, this is believing regarding salvation. Verse 13, they on the rock are they which, when they hear, receive the word with joy and have no root, which for a while believe, but in time of temptation they fall away. That should be continued, but it's not. That's another trait. Verse 14, and that which fell among the thorns are they which, when they have heard, go forth, and are choked with the cares and riches and pleasures of this life, and bring no fruit to perfection. But that on the good ground are they, which in an honest and good heart, having heard the word, keep it, and bring forth fruit with patience. So, the key here is the use of the word saved in verse 12. The fourth administration version of salvation was similar to the law administration's requirements to make it into the resurrection of the just. Believing and obedience needed to be maintained. Now, I'll cover that more thoroughly in a future session, but this fits pattern number 2. The next occurrence of Pisteuo is in Luke 8:50. It's a duplicate of Mark 5:36. But the next meaning of Pisteuo after that is going to be a brand new meaning. All the uses of Pisteuo we have seen so far have been intransitive. That is, they've had no direct object. In Greek, that's indicated by using the accusative case. But here in Luke 16:11, it has the true, and that is in the accusative case. If therefore you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true. Commit to your trust is pisteuo. So this is totally different meaning than believe, right? But it's not like you can go down through the lexicon, and when you think it would be cool to make pisteuo mean commit to your trust, that you stick it in there. No, you can't do that. Why? Because the contextual inference does not say so. In this case, the pattern that allows you to use this third new meaning is that pisteuo has to be transitive. It has to have a direct object in the accusative case. You can't squeeze your pet meaning in here. So when pisteuo is transitive, when it has a direct object in the accusative case, it means entrust. And there's many examples of this kind of thing in Greek and Hebrew. So you need to check the lexicons, and they'll tell you what to look for in case there are some meanings that are dependent upon grammatical information. Now, Thayer's lexicon is good for that. Very detailed. They'll always bring it up. Bauer's lexicon, too. But with Bauer's, you may have to decipher some abbreviations. Because now there's a table with both Thayer and Bauer. There's a table of abbreviations in the front that gives you what that abbreviation means. Now, to nail down this third meaning, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and give you a couple. John 2:24. John 2:24. It says, but Jesus did not commit pisteuo himself unto them, because he knew all. So, himself unto them. The himself is the object in the accusative case. So, commit is transitive here. So, it has to be commit. Commit to your trust or entrust. All right? Romans 3:1 is another one. Romans 3:1. What advantage then hath the Jew, or what profit is there of the circumcision? Much in every way, chiefly because that unto them were committed, pisteuo, the oracles of God. Here the word oracles is accusative case as the direct object of the verb pisteuo, so it is transitive, so that's entrust. And then finally, Galatians 2:7. There's a number of these, but I'm just going to give you 3 or 4. Galatians 2:7. But contrariwise, when they saw the gospel of the uncircumcision was committed, pisteuo, unto me, as the gospel of the circumcision was unto Peter. So again, pisteuo has a direct object in the accusative case. The word gospel is in the accusative case. So it means transitive, and it means entrust. So that is the pattern for this third meaning of pisteuo whenever it is transitive. It has a direct object in the accusative case. All the other occurrences of pisteuo that we've covered so far for the other two meanings, the other two grids, every single one of those is intransitive. It doesn't have a direct object in the accusative case. So this pattern stands. Isn't that interesting? So we just have a couple more occurrences of pisteuo to cover in Luke, and then we'll be done. The next use is Luke 20, verse 5. That's a duplicate of Mark 11:31. The next one after that is Luke 22, verse 67. Luke 22:67, it says, Are you the Christ? Tell us. And he said to them, If I tell you, you will not believe. So this fits pattern number 2 regarding salvation. The object of their believing is the Christ. Then the last meaning of Pisteuo in Luke is Luke 24:25. And he said to them, these are the two guys on the road to Emmaus. He said to them, O fools and slow of heart to believe, Pisteuo. And that has upon, epi, in the text. That is not translated by King James. So, and slow of heart to believe upon all that the prophets have spoken. Ought not Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory? And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So, this fits pattern number 2. They believed upon, epi, so we would put an X in the epi column, and this is regarding the Christ. This was stuff regarding himself, salvation oriented. So that fits pattern number 2. See how clear that is? So we've covered both pistis and pisteuo in the Synoptic Gospels, and there's been a treasure of learning in here. The techniques for believing. The master teacher, Jesus Christ, blazed the trail of believing for us to follow, and we can do the works that he did because we have Christ in us. That's great. There are 3 patterns for Pisteuo we've seen so far. They are signaled by 3 sets of signposts. In each case, the contextual inference told us which pattern each occurrence must fit into. There's no ambiguity because the word interprets itself. Bless you.